Good morning, colleagues, and thank you so much for joining us. This is the last in the series on the future of higher education. And today we're really privileged to have Professor KITAMURA, Yuto KITAMURA of the Graduate School of Education. Wonderful pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. And he's with us, in fact, at Tokyo College today, and we're really privileged to have him with us. He is also affiliated to the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo, and that's a really interesting new innovation, if you like, and it's been wonderful learning about it. He's an expert on comparative education and worked on education in various parts of Asia. And I'm hoping that we'll also be able to do some work in Africa. So just to say that he has an MA and a PhD from UCLA. He's worked at UNESCO in the education division there. He's taught at Nagoya University and at Sophia University. Has been a Fulbright scholar at George Washington University, and was a visiting professor at the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh, and has actually written a book on the student movement, the role of the student movement, at least in Dhaka. I can't remember the actual title, but it's something that I have to get hold of, taking into account the extent to which students have played a very significant role in South Africa. I also have to just mention that he's done a lot of work on SDG 4, and I think Professor Mino and I have to talk to you because we're doing something on that now. So maybe that's something that we'll chat about as we go forward. He's also a member of the Japan Comparative Education Society, Japanese Society for Education for Sustainable Development, and so on. Just a list of other associations, if you like. Also a number of awards. He has an honorary doctorate from University of Stockholm. He's has the 14th JSPS prize, and I have to say he's very well known. Whoever I meet know Professor KITAMURA. So I'm going to hand over to him now. But before I do that, I just want to just to make the usual comment that if you are going to ask questions later on, please do remember that if your camera is on, you will be captured. Your video will be captured when it's loaded onto YouTube. So if you don't want that, please switch off your camera. And just one last point to make, and that is that that today if Professor KITAMURA will speak for 25 minutes or something like that. Then we'll have a short discussion, and then we'll open it up for a broader discussion. So with that, I'm just going to hand over now to Professor KITAMURA. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Bawa, for giving me this precious opportunity. And I'm so honored to be here. And then I actually watched the previous 6 sessions, and then discussion was so inspiring and then thought-provoking, and then I hope I can make some contribution to the series of dialogue today. And let me share my slide. Yeah, I hope this is this fair? Yes. Okay. So let me start my talk. I've been, as Professor Bawa introduced me, I started my professional career working at UNESCO. Then after moving to the universities, I still continue working with those international agencies, including UNESCO, UNICEF, the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and so on and so forth. And of course, JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency. And through those works, I've been closely working with the countries, so-called developing countries, or we should call global south today. And then I have recognized the importance of international collaborations in education sector And it's not only the development assistance per se, which have been, provided by the donor countries or international organizations, but particularly in the higher education sector, the partners and the stakeholders are quite equally working. And then it's very important to promote collaborations among those partners. So today, I really would like to discuss about the importance of international collaborations in the higher education sector, focusing on the concept of the knowledge diplomacy, and then also taking up Asia or East Asia as an example. Okay, and of course, I don't have to really explain too much about the backgrounds of this. Of course, we are facing very difficult time today, including the conflicts and emergencies, and I feel very sad about those tragedies happening across the world today. Of course, also the importance of realizing the SDGs. And for doing this, I think the higher education sector has very important roles. And but this higher education sector has been forming the global market, and the globalization is, of course, very much influencing to this global market of the higher education. But there are two kind of opposite directions or phenomena we can observe. One is convergence and another is divergence. Convergence means, we are very much looking at the kind of the standardizations, and you may like to say westernization or even Americanizations of the higher education systems. While at the same time, because we are now sharing a lot of information across the borders, we recognize the differences, and also we see the importance of local context and the diversity. So how we can handle with these two opposite phenomena, like convergence and divergence together. And then in order to do this, I would say that international cooperation or cooperation across the borders is one way to promote. And there has been various different regional partnerships, such as ASEAN or EU, and then through these corporations, we also see the collaboration, but also the competitions. So how we can deal with these two issues, collaboration and the competitions. And of course, there are various different ways to discuss about the internationalization of higher education, but this is probably one of the most accepted or most well-known definition of the internationalization of higher education, proposed by Hans DeWitt and his colleagues. And then I would like to emphasize the most important phrase, which is the meaningful contribution to society. Why we have to internationalize our higher education systems? Because we really like to contribute to our societies by improving the quality of education and also, enhancing the mobility in this system. And probably we have to, in order to do this, we have to shift from the state-based approach to multi-actors or multi-stakeholders approach, which means, except a few countries, many countries, particularly in Asia, but also many countries in global South, as well as Europe, basically the higher education system have been developed by the state. The US and North America is probably kind of the exceptions, but this state-based approach has limitations because we really have to involve different actors in this process. So that's another issue we have to think of. So this student mobility is, one of the most prominent phenomena in the field of internationalization of higher education today. So I just like to emphasize this. And so we have two issues, as I raised in the beginning. We have to really improve the quality of the higher education by promoting the mobility of the students and scholars and the researchers. So because quality really motivates students to study or move, or not only students but also the scholars, researchers to move around And then by moving around, we can really improve the quality as well. So one of the new questions we are facing today is how to ensure the quality of the higher education systems in the process of collaborating or promoting the cross-border collaborations. And this is one very important issue because so far, we've been very much looking at the two big higher education systems as models. One is the North American model, another is European models. But then when we try to promote more collaborations, we really have to involve the universities in the global south. Then, unfortunately, some of the universities in the global south, as well as, of course, some of the universities in the global north as well, but particularly in the global south, some universities are kind of struggling to improve the quality of teaching and learning and the quality of programs, quality of facilities, and so on and so forth. So how we could really ensure the certain level of qualities, because otherwise we cannot really promote the cross-border collaborations. So what is doing? Then we see the regional networks try to ensure this kind of the quality, improving the quality. So how this regional collaboration started? Of course, we all know that the most successful and the biggest experience of regional collaboration is the Bologna process in Europe, and there have been the series of reforms, and I think this has really made the so-called higher education area in Europe, and many other regions are kind of following the European models. And East Asia is no exception. I mean, when I say East Asia here, it includes both Northeast and Southeast Asia. So this East Asia in a wider sense. We are now trying to form the regional collaborative frameworks. So let me take up East Asia as an example to think of how we can really promote the regional collaboration. But then we face some difficulties or challenges in East Asia because such a diversity here, there are so many differences among the countries, For instance, politically, we have both, those socialist states, and also, some states are having the more militant regimes and so on and so forth. So it's not very simple politically, but also culturally and religiously, we have diverse kinds of the types of religions believed in this region, and then there are so many ethnic groups and so on and so forth, and also the economic status and so on and so forth. So it's so diversified in these regions. Then, as I mentioned earlier, how we can ensure the quality is the biggest challenge. But at the same time, if we can do successfully in this region, we may be able to show another model of the regional collaboration. So that's what the people who are involved in the higher education sector in East Asia are trying to do today. And so what is happening in East Asia, there are so much knowledge, data. We've been collecting a lot of data here, but no shared framework yet to utilize those data and the knowledge and experience we have, because there is a lack of big pictures, what sort of the higher education we really like to realize here. So this is more like a state level I'm talking about the shared framework. But on the ground, what is happening? Actually, students have been moving around inside the region so dynamically. They are very dynamic. This is data showing that, comparing the students who move from one country to another place, okay? And then as you see, the number on the left-hand side is the number in 1999 or sometime nearby. And then right-hand side is 2018 and nearby. of course, there are still many students going to US or Australia, or of course Europe, particularly UK. But also, as you see, students are really moving inside East Asia. East Asia here is ASEAN, ASEAN, 10 countries in ASEAN plus China, Korea, and Japan. We see so many students now moving around. So what is happening is the higher education system in East Asia is becoming more internationalized, while the states are not really following enough to support these students. So that's why 2012, the ministers of ASEAN plus 3 countries, plus 3 means China, Korea, Japan. These 13 countries established the ASEAN plus 3 working group on mobility and quality assurance of higher education. And then every year, this group has been meeting to discuss about how to ensure the quality. And then I have been representing the Japanese government in this group for the last nearly 10 years. And so I've been closely working on this. And then we have developed some sort of the guidelines to ensure the students can, for instance, smoothly transfer their credits and at the host university to their home institutions. This may sound quite simple, but sometimes it's very complicated because there have been different credit systems around the world, and even in Asia, East Asia, we have several of these different systems. And then the way to count the credit is very complicated. So we have to start working on these kind of things. But why we put a lot of energy to make sure that students can move smoothly? Because we believe the internationalization of higher education is very important for the future of higher education. For instance, there have been the issues discussed in the past dialogues. There have been the issue of the democracy and also how to decolonize the higher education systems. And then by promoting the mobility of the students in the regions, we can share the knowledge and experiences. So in this region of East Asia, of course, Japan, Korea, China, and then also the region like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, country like Singapore, these have been leading the higher education system. And then we have been heavily influenced by the Western universities as a production of knowledge. But at the same time, we have been observing their own indigenous production of the knowledge. There have been a lot of knowledge produced on the ground in different countries, which have not been internationally known yet, but we should share. So in my talk, this is what I really would like to emphasize, that we really have to diversify the knowledge. And then this international collaboration and the regional cooperation is really one of the key to do so. But when we talk about internationalization, there's one way to discuss, which is to promote, to improve the soft power. This is, of course, very known concept proposed by Joseph Nye of the Harvard. But this soft power discussion I don't feel very comfortable with that, because when we use the concept of soft power, this is based on the power relations and the issue of the hegemony. So those those that have more knowledge have more power, and then more chance of having hegemony over others. So the soft power discussion is not really relevant in particularly in the higher education sector to me. So what is more relevant? Then I have encountered this concept of knowledge diplomacy. This concept was used in the international relations in the 1990s, but at that time it was more about intellectual property rights, right? But then one of the very known professor named Professor Jane Knight of the University of Toronto, Canada, she proposed this knowledge diplomacy in her own way. And actually, we had her as a visiting professor about 6-7 years ago on this campus. And then I had a very long discussion with her on this concept. And I have found that this concept of knowledge diplomacy is very important because this is a concept to consider knowledge as a common goods for humanities. So we don't, instead of competing each other by having more power over others, in higher education sector, we really like to collaborate. And then that's a more diplomatic efforts. And then actually students and scholars in higher education sector, they are knowledge diplomats. So, they are the ones who really promote diplomacy. And how to share the knowledge here in order to increase the more harmony in the region as well as globally. So this knowledge diplomacy is still, on the way to discuss. And then Jane had just recently, she published a book, and then she is now, she's coming next month to Japan. And then I hope, we can have more discussions on this. But why this kind of, concept of knowledge diplomacy is important? Because we really would like to promote the cross-cultural understanding about students. Because if students become more sensitive about other cultures, and that will be ultimately, promote the harmony in the regions. And so by doing the knowledge, by sharing the knowledge, we can do this. But in order to do this, the research shows that we really have to provide a more structured interaction between culturally diverse individuals. So you cannot just, mix the students and then put there. I mean, of course, there will be some chemistry happens, and they can, of course, interact. But at the same time, we really have to provide in a certain manner, in a structured manner, for the students to interact. So that's what the universities are now trying to do. And by doing so, I think if students, they are the future citizens of the, if they understand other cultures and sensitive about those, and then we can really fight against those kind of the rise of the nationalisms. I mean, of course, nationalism itself is not good, evil or bad, but we see the sort of the nationalism which promote extreme international violence today. But in order to prevent that, such kind of rise of nationalism, we really would like to make students aware of the importance of understanding other cultures. So what I'm discussing here is to really try to promote regional harmony so regional harmony, how we can promote, and then by promoting this regional harmony, how we can formulate a sense of regional identity among our students. For instance, how to cultivate a sense of Asian identity among the students. So all these are the important issues. But then I'd like to propose one way to understand the form of the international corporations in higher education sector. International cooperation in higher education sector has been, traditionally done in two ways. This is my typologies. One is international development assistance. This is basically more like a donor and recipient relationships. While there have been also intellectual exchange. This is more mutual and equal partnerships. And then, but what has been happening so far was like this, I hope this figure makes sense to you. Those countries, the universities or higher education systems in the country like Cambodia, Laos, they receive more from the country like Japan, Korea, China, and so on. So for US, UK. But then these countries, while they are growing, I mean, their economy grows, their status and position shifts towards that directions. So, but this is very much a conventional way of looking at international corporations. But I think this old-fashioned type of international cooperation in higher education has to be changed. And there have been various different efforts to do so. And then I really like to emphasize the one which is like Japanese case. It's called the SATREPS. SATREPS is efforts by the Japanese government. And then this is a mixture of the official development assistance and also intellectual corporations. So Ministry of Education and Ministry of Finance of Japan collaborate. And then underneath of this, they have a JST, which is more like a scientific agency of the Ministry of Education of Japan. And then JICA, this is official development assistance for the foreign affairs. These four have made a MOU to work together. And then involving the Japanese scholars to work in the developing countries to understand the global agenda, what is happening there, for instance, like climate change, biodiversity, and human rights, and so on and so forth. There are various different issues that these countries are facing. But there is a conditions. These Japanese scholars need to work with the local scholars. Because locals, these Japanese scholars may have more updated scientific knowledge, but those local scholars know much more about what is actually happening there, right? Context. So they need to work together, and then first they do the research. So not just jumping on to provide the official development assistance. Instead, they have to understand what is happening there, and then what are the problems, and then what are the causes, and how we can solve those problems. After identifying these issues in collaboration between the local scholars and Japanese scholars, then the official development assistance come in to provide assistance to solve that problems. By doing this, I think we really try to combine the conventional to international corporations like intellectual exchange and international development assistance. So before we didn't, of course, sometimes we see some synergies between, but there was no structure and organized manner. But today we can see this kind of efforts, not only by Japan, but also ASEAN, and between ASEAN and the European Union or US, there are various different donors considering new approach. And then there have been global and regional understanding to support such efforts. Those are the, for instance, global convention adopted at UNESCO and so on. So I see various different examples of promoting the international corporations in the higher education sector, involving the experts from diverse backgrounds. At the global level, there's a Future Earth focusing on environmental sustainability and climate change. And then this topic, the universities or experts in developed countries alone cannot deal with. This has to be done, dealt by collaboration across the world. And then ASEAN has been very much now trying to promote the collaboration with ASEAN countries. And then SATREPS, as I explained earlier. But at the same time, there's one very big phenomenon we have to bear in our mind. That's a growing influence of China, because China itself, of course, I should also mention about India. China and India, they have huge higher education systems. And then they are now very keen to collaborate across the borders. And then I just showed one example of China's effort. But so, we can easily criticize these kind of efforts, but we really have to be fair. What is positive impacts and the negative aspects of this promoting this kind of, higher education cooperation? okay, are done by the huge mega higher education systems. I mean, why I'm mentioning this, because that's one partially coming from my own experience involved in the ASEAN Plus 3 working group. ASEAN Plus 3 working group, we are working, of course, with China, but at the same time, China alone has been also working quite a lot with ASEAN. So sometimes there are parallel process, ASEAN Plus 3 as a whole, but also ASEAN Plus China process. Of course, Korea and Japan also doing this kind of parallel efforts, but because of due to the size of the system,
Absolutely.
Chinese impact is quite big. So here are a few more slides to conclude my talk. Is it possible to promote the regional harmonizations, and particularly by facing the challenge of diversity in these regions? My answer is yes. We have, I have to say, we must promote harmonizations. Why? Because, as I mentioned earlier, the very important objective of internationalization of higher education is to promote a meaningful contribution to society, as Hans Dewitt emphasized. And by promoting the knowledge diplomacy, we can work with various different people coming from the diverse backgrounds from other sectors, And there was in the previous dialogue, there was an issue of the one researchers joined the session, raised a question in the last session, what is the importance of the interdisciplinary researches? And I think, this concept of international collaboration really encourage people to work together from the very diverse background. And then that is very important. And then particularly, I would like to emphasize the role of Global South, But in order to do this, we need kind of the shared frameworks to ensure the quality of the higher education. How we can deal with the dominance of Western or American models, that's another issue we need to re-examine. And also, the innovation and entrepreneurship is another new topics in the higher education, how we can work on by promoting international corporations. So this is my last slide, and we say, higher education as a global public good, but also global public goods as well. So we have good intention to promote higher education by fostering future citizens. This is based on the public good. But at the same time, the higher education is becoming more like a commodities. But there shouldn't be commercial commodities. It should be like a public good to be shared by the public, and shared across the borders. So how we can realize that the concept of knowledge diplomacy really helps us to think of this. And so these are just a few things I just like to mention. How we can also think of the education outside formal system will be included in the higher education system. What sort of research and innovations we can promote, and then how we can really ensure that the students really have the more cross-cultural understanding. So these are the kind of the topics I would like to throw. There's no such concrete conclusions, but I would like to end my talk here. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. What you've done essentially is just kind of really provided us with the basis for a whole kind of enterprise of thinking, at least about universities as bridges between societies. I mean, universities are knowledge intensive, and basically that means that they are so intensely local and global, kind of, and they can play these role of bridges between societies. Yes, and you mentioned the dominant forces of China and India and so on. And you know, to some extent, we've experienced that in South Africa, like with the BRICS kind of framework. You know, just these very powerful hitters, if you like. And it's very difficult to manage the kind of the flow of interests, if you like. And of course, in Russia, of course, it's got its own agenda, and China has its own agenda, and so on. We also have the South Africa-Japan University Forum. And I always say, you know, that I was saying to colleagues here as well, like, and I was saying that to, I was in Kyoto yesterday, we were talking about this yesterday. And I mean, it has been interesting to see the nature of that collaboration, much more equal, much more mutual, much more sort of a commitment to local and global, you know, so it's also, I think, about, you know, what you were saying, which is this idea of starting up from a point of view that we have to build together, if you like. You know. So I wondered, you know, whether, by the way, I know Jane Knight, so I'm sorry I'll miss her because I leave before she comes. But you know, hopefully we'll be in touch with her again. So yeah, in some respects, I mean, it seems to me at least that addressing the SDGs might really be the basis for, you know, for a knowledge enterprise that provides us with the opportunity of working in this mutual fashion, but understanding the need for the local and the global. Because, you know, having the local targets and so on is one thing. The actual action is going to happen at the local level. So you have to find a way of mediating, you know, the conversation between those two. And it seems to me that the universities are really central to that, or could be central to that enterprise. Would you kind of go along with that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you have really picked up the important issues out of my discussions. And then I'd like to respond to two things. Sure. I mean, first, the last one, the university as a knowledge enterprise, and then how we can deal with this, you know, local and global. And I had a quite interesting experience before having a chat with the senior management of the university in Thailand, and because Thai universities, particularly the national universities in Thailand, they have been now having the parallel program, like the international program and the local programs. So many faculties teach two languages, you know, international program in English and then local program in Thai language. And then in Japan, you know, we are also trying to internationalize our education programs and then try to introduce English as a medium of instructions. So I just naively thought Thai is really putting a lot of emphasis on the international programs. But the senior management of the Thai universities, you know, they said, of course, we consider international program important, but also, you know, this local program is very important as well. For instance, you know, I experienced the Asian financial crisis in 1990s. And after the crisis, they revisited their own society. And then there is, for instance, the idea of sufficient economy. So, you know, instead of really pushing forward for the capitalism, particularly like a very greedy, you know, capitalism, the Thai society has been having the idea of sufficient economy. So if you have sufficient, you should share. You know, you don't have to, you know, monopolize all those, you know, profits in the society. So there is an idea of sufficient economy, and then this has been very much emphasized. And then this is a new, you know, this is not really the idea so much emphasized in the, you know, the macroeconomics or microeconomics we study in the US, for instance. So in these local programs, you know, they discuss about this kind of stuff. Okay, so how we can, but of course, you know, they study those internationally shared macroeconomics and microeconomics, but also, you know, there are issues there. I mean, same thing like Islamic, you know, economy, you know, there is a Muslim bank, you know, very different banking system. these are not fairly or sufficiently taken up in the study at the Western universities or even Japanese universities. We also have a lot of different traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge here, but we haven't looked at it carefully there.
How to surface it,
right? And then there's another concept which is called the reverse innovations. Innovation always happened in the West, and then the innovation is brought to the global South. That was conventional way, but now, because there are so many things happening on the ground locally, so we can promote the idea of reverse innovation as well. So there are many things, I think, examples about this local and global. So that's one thing we really have to think, what sort of knowledge enterprise the university plays a role. And another issue I really think, very important for Japan, for instance, to work with Africa in more equal and mutual partnership. Because we have a long history, but at the same time, we have not really deepened our relationship yet. But that means kind of same to Middle East and Latin America. Japan didn't have a kind of bad history we had in Asia. We had we had created some tensions, a lot of tension in this region as well, but we didn't do that with Middle East or Africa. So there are certain possibility of promoting collaboration and relationship. But the universities have not really done much yet. So I think that's areas we really need to explore.
No, I think that, the purpose of our meeting, going to Kyoto yesterday was really to meet with the Center for African Area Studies, but particularly to try and understand how to use the South Africa-Japan framework, to broaden Japan-Africa kind of linkages. And I think that there's a lot to learn from what has happened already. So thank you for that. Yeah. Naoko, come in, please.
Yes, thank you very much for the very interesting talk. I really find it important to think knowledge as global common good. So thank you very much for these insights. And I also agree with the idea that the collaboration is very important for the development of the higher education. And my question is about the collaboration outside of the education sector. And especially when we think of the Global South incorporated in this framework, I think there are quite a big number of students or potential students who are having to face this choice between going to higher education or starting to work right away. For them, this question is a very urgent question, whether they can start earning money right away and giving life to the family. So I would like to know, as you have very impressive experience in international organizations and international collaboration on education, what can it be, what can we do to collaborate with non-educational sector, especially in this kind of production sector, be it agricultural or industrial, in order to develop higher education in the countries which is so-called the Global South. So that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Please go.
Yeah, that's a very important and interesting question. And then that's very important. Particularly today, it's very important because there has been certain level of aspiration. Of course, it depends on the country, but there have been certain level of aspiration to send their kids to higher education because of the opportunities they believe. But at the same time, we see, particularly in the countries in the Global South, we see the high rate of the unemployment among the college graduates because the labor market doesn't have enough job opportunities for the college graduate, all the college graduates. So sometimes I feel like, this is not really it's not really efficient, right? And then reasonable to do. So we really have to think of the relationship between the job market and then the education systems. And there have been different ways to deal with, and it depends also, very complicated because of the history of the higher education systems in different countries. Some countries have more strong vocational training programs in the education systems, while some don't. So I cannot really simply generalize, but at the same time, there have been certain efforts I have observed, very interesting examples. I mean, one is another, I mean, again, I'm not really expert on Thai, but there's another example in Thailand. There's one university established by the Thai people who studied in Japan and went back to Thailand. And then they work in the private sector. And then they established the university to accommodate the Thai students who may seek for the job opportunities in the Japanese companies which have been operating in Thailand. And then because of this, historical background of establishing a university, this university is really, support the students for the certain kind of types of jobs, particularly working with the Japanese company. That's one interesting, efforts we can see. But also, doesn't have to be universities. I mean, for instance, Kosen is Japanese institutions. This is secondary and post-secondary levels. So after finishing the lower secondary level, some students attend the school called Kosen. Kosen is focusing on the field of engineering. And it has 3 years high school education, but also 2 years post-secondary. So 5 years education to really train for the certain particular fields of study. And then after 5 years, they are very becoming the experts in the field. Then what they do, they have opportunities. They can either be transferred to the universities. For instance, Faculty of Engineering at the University of Tokyo, also every year we receive some students from the Kosen, while other type of students who really wants to work, they can work with the companies. So they have choices. And then this Kosen system is now becoming quite popular, for instance, in Mongolia. Mongolia actually had used the word Kosen for this kind of upper secondary and post-secondary educational institutions. So here's another way to think, you don't really have to think of only the higher education, but how to combine the upper secondary and post-secondary and higher tertiary levels. So, but these work-related issues, I think very, very important. So I'm sorry I cannot fully respond to your question, but that's a very, very important topic, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naoko. Huijia, please come in.
Hi, I have 3 questions. Should I ask them one by one or should I ask all 3 together?
I think ask all of them.
Okay. Thank you very much for this presentation. It was really interesting. So my first question is, you mentioned the collaboration on the SDGs, and I was thinking about how the Times Higher Education also has to impact rankings. So how does that promote collaboration, or does it actually make it more competitive? Because some of the collaboration on SDGs might be based on publications. So I was wondering if you know whether there are initiatives to promote collaboration instead of competition on the SDGs, and also how to prevent SDGs from being another box checking exercise on the part of the higher education institutions. So that's my first question. My second question is, how do you think we can promote interdisciplinary collaboration in research internationally when it is not sufficiently taken up even at the local level yet at many institutions? And it also clashes with the structure of universities because professors or research, they are rewarded based on publication and expertise, but there's not enough maybe journals to accommodate interdisciplinary research. And my third question is the capacity of universities in internationalization. So help universities and universities with reputation, they can internationalize quite easily. But what happens to the rest of the universities, like the second tier or the not so well-known universities? So these are my 3 questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Big questions.
Big questions, and good questions. Again, thank you. Thank you very much, Vijay. And Actually, your first and second questions, somehow I can respond together. I mean, it has been some linkage. I mean, of course, now, I mean, when we look at the higher education market internationally, there has been the big competitions, and there has been always the, you know, the race of publishing more papers in the more impactful journals and so on and so forth. But the contribution to the realization of SDGs really brought, I think, highlight different dimensions of the research, education research and development. I mean, because it's not always the papers. I mean, there has been always the problems there. So we really have to be more in practice to solve problems. So you cannot just publish the papers and to compete. I mean, you really have to solve the actual problems. Then what is important? Then we've been talking about the importance of promoting interdisciplinary researches. What the interdisciplinary, or we can say more like a transdisciplinary research, you know, what's the transdisciplinary means, you know, transdisciplinarity. I mean, interdisciplinary is still based on the collaborations among the experts, scholars. But when we say transdisciplinary, there has been a transversality of the involving the different actors and stakeholders. So it's not only the researchers who are involved in the research, but those citizens or people in the amateurs, I mean, non-professionals in the issues, we really have to involve all these people with this umbrella of the, you know, transversality. And then this kind of transdisciplinary research is the key to promote, to really solve the actual problems. So, but at the same time, particularly in the context of, for instance, developing countries, people still believe the experts know everything, you know, experts know more. But by promoting international collaborations, we can bring some different ideas and aspects and highlighting the importance of really promoting the transdisciplinary approach. And then this, of course, has to be done based on the interdisciplinary research. So I think I may not be fully responding to your questions, but I think these two, I mean, in order to think of these two questions, the key is transdisciplinary research to solve the problems in order to realize SDGs. So that's my response. And then the third question, capacity of internationalization. Yes, but that's because of that, you know, there is a limited capacities of certain universities. Of course, you know, there are top tiers and second tier, third tier, and so forth. What we have been observing very interestingly in Asia is that it's not only the collaboration between the universities in the top tiers. Actually, universities in second, third tiers are also, of course, you know, I mean, collaborating. Of course, you know, they have different motivations and reasons, but because the limited capacities you have, you need some to share and support each other. So, of course, universities in top tier collaborate, but these second tier or third tiers, they also have reasons to collaborate. And so we don't really differentiate. But at the same time, I mentioned about the issue of quality. We don't want students to be very disadvantageous to study at the universities in the second or third tiers. So what the state have to do is to ensure the quality. So at least if we can ensure the quality, basic quality of education provided by the universities, we don't really concern about the kind of the capacities of the universities in a sense. I mean, because you don't have enough capacity, that's why you collaborate with others. So that I hope, you know, this is partially responding to your questions.
Yeah, and I think that very often the second and third tier universities are the ones that are closest to the context.
Yes.
So that's the other angle, you know, that they can bring to the participants.
That's true.
Yeah, thank you so much for those questions, Vijaya. They're very, very good. Let's go on to Lydia. Thank you, Lydia. Please come in.
Hello. Kitamura-sensei, thank you very much for this super interesting presentation. I have a very simple question, maybe that is directed to Japan and Japan's universities. So, in order to promote Japan as an attractive academic destination, do you think that for researchers and students, of course, and for professors, do you think that the linguistic and ethnical diversity of Japan itself has to be promoted, like the Ainu and the Okinawans and the Koreans minorities? They have very interesting culture. So do you think in this case that, for example, their languages should be included, the history in the educational system of Japan? Thank you.
May I?
Yeah, please do good.
Thank you, Lydia, for the very important topic to raise. I mean, issues they raise. Yes, I mean, in order to make, Japanese universities more attractive destinations, of course, promotion the diversity on our campus is very, very important. I mean, that has to be done. I mean, but at the same time, you have raised a quite interesting issue about when we discuss about the diversity. We often think of the international diversity, but local diversity is also important. We have of course, diversity inside Japan. So how to, promote such local diversity is one issue we have to think of. Another issue. Japanese language, we should appreciate we should be thankful of using the Japanese language. I mean, Japan is probably the, only the country which can train the medical doctors to in our own native language. I mean, outside Europe or outside Western country regions. Of course, Korea, China have been making efforts, but still some textbooks are still written in English. But Japan, we have translated everything in Japanese. So this is a quite interesting case, and I think we have to appreciate that as well. So of course, issue of diversity is very important, but two things, what the diversity means. We always think of international diversity, but you have to think of the local diversity. That's Lydia-san. You have made a very important issue. And another, what is the value of Japanese language? That I also have to think of. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That takes us to the end. And I'd like to just thank, first of all, thank Lydia, Vijay, and Naoko for your questions. But a special thank you to Professor Kitamura. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, and it's absolutely wonderful, wide-ranging discussion. I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to kind of follow up. Thank you so much. Just to bring to your attention that something like conclusion to the series is going to be sort of a kind of colloquium, I guess, which will be held next week on Wednesday, on the 8th of March. And we'll have 3 sort of inputs, if you like, on the future of higher education. I'll do something for 25 minutes. Then Professor Zul Razak, who is the rector at the International Islamic University in Malaysia, but was also the president of the International Association of Universities. And Professor Ota, the executive vice president here at University of Tokyo, will make inputs. And then there'll be 3 respondents. It'll be Professor Kitamura, who will join us again next week, Dr. Hosokawa, that's Naoko, who asked a question just now, and sorry, two respondents, and they will respond to those inputs. So I hope very much that you can join us next week on Wednesday. And the whole thing will be sort of moderated by Professor Mino from our Tokyo College. Of course, we all know him. Thank you so much, colleagues, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. And Professor Kitamura, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.